The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of Millbrook County, Nebraska, when Harold Jamison first noticed something was terribly wrong. His prize-winning Hampshire pig, Bessie, had been acting strange for weeks, obsessively digging in the same spot behind the old barn. What started as innocent rooting had become something far more disturbing. The hole was now 3 feet deep and growing wider each day, despite Harold's repeated attempts to fill it back in. But on this particular Tuesday morning in September, as Harold approached the excavation site with his shovel in hand, he discovered something that would change his life forever. Protruding from the dark soil was the unmistakable glint of metal, something that clearly didn't belong buried in his family's century-old farmland. Thomas Brennan had been Harold's neighbor for over 30 years, living just across the county road that separated their properties. The two men had shared countless conversations over the fence line, discussing crop yields, weather patterns, and the challenges of modern farming. But when Thomas saw Harold standing motionless beside that ever-growing hole, his weathered face pale as morning frost, he knew this was different. Harold's voice cracked as he called out across the field, his words barely audible above the autumn wind. "Please, sir, don't let that pig dig again," Harold pleaded, his eyes fixed on something in the dirt that Thomas couldn't yet see. The desperation in his neighbor's voice sent a chill down Thomas's spine, and against his better judgment, he found himself walking toward the excavation that would soon consume both their lives. "What?" Thomas discovered that day defied all logic and reason. Buried beneath generations of Nebraska topsoil was a metal object unlike anything either farmer had ever encountered. It appeared to be some sort of container, roughly the size of a coffin, but made from a material that seemed to shift and change color depending on the angle of observation. The surface was covered in symbols that looked almost like writing, but in no language either man recognized. More unsettling was the way the object seemed to emit a low humming sound, barely perceptible but constant, as if something inside was very much alive and waiting. Thomas's first instinct was to contact the authorities, but Harold begged him to reconsider. The Jamison family had owned this land since 1887, passed down through 4 generations of farmers who had worked this soil with their bare hands. Harold's grandfather had told stories of strange lights in the sky during the 1930s, tales that the family had always dismissed as the ramblings of an old man spending too much time alone in the fields. But now, staring at this impossible artifact, Harold wondered if those stories might have contained more truth than anyone had ever imagined. The two men made a pact that morning. Standing in the shadow of the old barn where Harold's great-grandfather had once stored grain for the winter months, they would investigate this mystery themselves, at least initially, before involving any outside parties. Thomas had served in Vietnam and possessed a practical mind for problem-solving, while Harold had spent his entire life studying the land and understanding the subtle signs that nature provided. Together, they reasoned, they might be able to uncover the truth about what lay buried beneath the Nebraska plains. Their first attempt to extract the object proved futile. Despite using Thomas's tractor and a system of chains and pulleys, the container remained firmly embedded in the earth. More disturbing was the discovery that the hole seemed to be refilling itself overnight, not with loose dirt but with a dark, almost liquid substance that neither man could identify. Each morning brought new challenges as they found their previous day's work mysteriously undone, as if the earth itself was fighting their efforts to uncover whatever lay hidden below. Dr. Sarah Chen had been studying unexplained phenomena for the University of Nebraska for over 15 years, specializing in geological anomalies and unexplained subsurface formations. When Thomas finally reached out to her 3 weeks after the initial discovery, he was careful to provide only the most basic details about their situation. Sarah's interest was immediately piqued, not just by the description of the object, but by the unusual seismic readings that had been recorded in Millbrook County over the past month. Her equipment had detected rhythmic vibrations emanating from somewhere in the rural farmland, pulses that seemed to follow a pattern to regular. To be natural, Sarah's arrival at the Jamison farm marked the beginning of a new phase in their investigation. Armed with ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis equipment, she quickly confirmed what the farmers had suspected but been afraid to voice. The buried object was not alone. Her scans revealed a network of similar containers scattered throughout the area, some buried deeper than others, all connected by what appeared to be a series of underground tunnels or conduits. The implications were staggering, suggesting that whatever they had uncovered was part of a much larger and more complex system. The first major breakthrough came when Sarah discovered that the symbols on the container's surface were not random markings but appeared to be some form of coordinate system. Using advanced photographic analysis and pattern recognition software, she was able to determine that the symbols corresponded to specific locations throughout the American Midwest. Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, and parts of Colorado, all featured prominently in what appeared to be a carefully planned network of buried installations. The question that haunted all 3 investigators was simple yet terrifying. Who had buried these objects, and why? As autumn gave way to winter, the investigation took on an increasingly urgent tone. The containers were becoming more active, their humming growing louder and more frequent. Local wildlife had begun exhibiting unusual behavior, with birds avoiding the area entirely and cattle refusing to graze in nearby pastures. Harold's other pigs had started showing signs of agitation, and several had developed strange markings on their skin that resembled the symbols found on the buried containers. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that Bessie the pig, who had started it all, had somehow developed an uncanny ability to locate other burial sites across the county. The breakthrough that changed everything came on a frigid December morning, when Sarah's equipment detected a massive energy surge emanating from the primary container. The readings were unlike anything in her professional experience, suggesting the activation of some kind of dormant technology. Harold and Thomas watched in amazement as the container began to emit a bright, pulsing light that penetrated through several feet of soil and became visible from the surface. The light pattern seemed to be some form of communication, a signal being broadcast across the network of buried installations throughout the region. What happened next would test the limits of their understanding and force them to confront possibilities that challenged everything they thought they knew about their world. The container began to rise from the earth on its own, not through any mechanical force but through some form of controlled levitation that defied conventional physics. As it emerged fully from the soil, the true scope of their discovery became apparent. This was not simply a buried artifact, but rather a piece of technology so advanced that it might as well have been magic to their 21st century minds. The container's surface became transparent, revealing its contents for the first time since the investigation began. Inside lay not the remains of some ancient civilization, but rather a collection of organic specimens preserved in a crystal-clear fluid. The specimens appeared to be seeds or perhaps embryos, representing plant and animal life forms that were both familiar and alien. Sarah's analysis suggested that these were genetic samples, possibly representing Earth's biodiversity from some distant point in time, either past or future. Thomas was the first to voice what they were all thinking but afraid to say aloud. These containers were not artifacts from some lost human civilization, but rather evidence of intervention by intelligence from beyond Earth. The coordinate system, the advanced preservation technology, the strategic placement across America's agricultural heartland, all pointed to a plan conceived and executed by minds far more sophisticated than any human organization. The question was no longer what they had found, but rather what they were supposed to do with this knowledge. The revelation that followed shook their understanding to its core. Sarah's continued analysis of the symbols revealed what appeared to be a countdown mechanism, dates and coordinates that suggested a specific timeline for whatever plan these containers represented. According to her calculations, the network was approaching some kind of activation phase, scheduled for the following spring when agricultural activity would be at its peak across the Midwest. The implications were staggering, suggesting that whatever intelligence had placed these containers had been planning this moment for decades, possibly centuries. Harold's family history took on new significance as they delved deeper into the mystery. His great-grandfather's stories about strange lights in the sky during the 1930s now seemed less like the ramblings of an isolated farmer and more like eyewitness accounts of the container installation process. Family records revealed that several previous generations of Jamesons had reported unusual phenomena on their land, including livestock behavior changes and unexplained crop circle formations that had been dismissed as natural occurrences or practical jokes. The investigation reached a critical turning point when they discovered that Bessie's digging behavior was not random but rather guided by some form of external intelligence. The pig had been responding to subsonic signals transmitted between the containers, signals that were gradually increasing in frequency and intensity as the network approached its activation phase. This explained not only Bessie's obsessive digging, but also the behavioral changes observed in other animals throughout the region. The containers were somehow communicating with local fauna, using them as unwitting agents in the preparation for whatever event was scheduled to occur. Dr. Contacts within the scientific community provided access to classified government databases that revealed the true scope of the situation. Similar container networks had been discovered in agricultural regions around the world. From the wheat fields of Kansas to the rice paddies of Southeast Asia, government agencies had been quietly monitoring these installations for years, but their understanding was limited to basic observation and documentation. The Millbrook County discovery represented the first time that anyone had successfully accessed and analyzed the container's contents and purpose. The final piece of the puzzle emerged when Sarah successfully decoded the complete message contained within the symbol system. The containers represented a global preservation project designed to safeguard Earth's genetic heritage against some anticipated catastrophic event. But the most shocking revelation was the timeline embedded within the message. The installation of this network had begun in the early 20th century, suggesting that whoever was responsible had been observing Earth and planning this intervention for over 100 years. As winter turned to spring, the investigators faced an impossible decision. They possessed knowledge that could fundamentally change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. But they also realized that releasing this information prematurely could cause worldwide panic and social upheaval. The containers were designed to activate regardless of human interference, suggesting that their creators had anticipated the possibility of discovery and had built safeguards into their system. The morning of the activation arrived with deceptive normalcy. Harold's farm looked much the same as it had 6 months earlier, but beneath the surface, profound changes were taking place. The container network activated simultaneously across the globe, releasing its preserved genetic material into the soil and atmosphere. The process was invisible to casual observation but represented the largest biological intervention in Earth's history since the planet's formation. Harold, Thomas, and Sarah watched from the old barn as the final phase of the activation occurred. The containers dissolved into the earth, their advanced materials breaking down into component elements that would nourish the preserved genetic samples they had carried. The network that had existed for decades was now complete, its purpose fulfilled through a process so subtle and gradual that most of humanity would never realize what had occurred on their planet. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to appear throughout the agricultural regions where the containers had been located. Crop yields increased dramatically. New species of beneficial insects appeared, and soil quality improved beyond anything that conventional farming methods could explain. The intervention had been designed not to replace Earth's existing ecosystem, but to enhance and strengthen it against future challenges that the planet's original inhabitants could not yet perceive or understand. The three investigators made the decision to document their experience, but to limit the distribution of their findings to a small circle of trusted scientists and government officials. They understood that the truth about the container network would eventually emerge, but they also recognized that humanity needed time to adapt to the reality of their situation. The knowledge that Earth had been under benevolent observation and protection for over a century was both humbling and reassuring, but it fundamentally challenged human assumptions about their planet's independence and isolation. Harold returned to his daily farming routine, but his perspective on the land had been forever changed. Every morning when he walked through his fields, he was reminded that his family had been unwitting guardians of something far more significant than anyone had ever imagined. Bessie, the pig who had started it all, had returned to normal behavior, her mysterious compulsion to dig apparently satisfied now that the containers had served their purpose. The hole behind the barn had filled in naturally, leaving no trace of the extraordinary events that had unfolded there. Thomas found himself spending more time studying the sky, wondering about the intelligence that had orchestrated such an elaborate and long-term intervention in Earth's development. The knowledge that humanity was not alone in the universe brought both comfort and responsibility. The understanding that their planet was part of a larger community of worlds that looked out for one another across the vast distances of space. Dr. Sarah Chen continued her research, but her focus had shifted from unexplained phenomena to the subtle signs of the genetic enhancement taking place around the world. She established a network of researchers who were quietly monitoring the changes brought about by the container activation, documenting improvements in agricultural productivity, biodiversity, and environmental resilience that would benefit generations of humans yet to be born. The story of the Millbrook County discovery became a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few who understood both its significance and the need for discretion. But the effects of that day, when a curious pig began digging behind an old Nebraska barn, would ripple through history, representing humanity's first conscious contact with the benevolent intelligence that had been watching over Earth for longer than anyone had ever imagined. The farmers who had pleaded for the digging to stop had instead uncovered evidence of care and protection that spanned generations. A reminder that even in the vastness of space, no world truly stands alone. 5 years have passed since that extraordinary spring morning when the container network completed its ancient mission. Harold Jameson still works his land in Millbrook County, but the Nebraska soil now yields harvests that break every agricultural record in the state's history. His wheat grows taller and more resilient than anything his neighbors can produce, and his livestock display an unusual vitality that veterinarians struggle to explain. Harold keeps the secret locked away in his heart, but sometimes, when the evening light catches the fields just right, he swears he can still hear that subtle humming that once emanated from beneath the earth. Thomas Brennan has become something of a local legend among the farming community, though for reasons far different from the truth. His expertise in soil management and crop rotation has earned him invitations to speak at agricultural conferences across the Midwest, where he shares techniques that he learned not from textbooks but from observing the miraculous changes that followed the container activation. He never mentions the real source of his knowledge, but his methods have helped hundreds of farmers improve their yields in ways that seem almost magical to those who implement them. Dr. Sarah Chen now heads a specialized research division within the University of Nebraska, officially studying sustainable agriculture but privately monitoring the ongoing effects of the Genetic Enhancement Project. Her team has documented remarkable improvements in soil biodiversity, with new species of beneficial microorganisms appearing throughout the regions where containers were once buried. The data suggests that the intervention was designed to unfold gradually over decades, each year bringing subtle improvements that will ultimately transform Earth's agricultural capacity without disrupting existing ecosystems. The secret network of researchers that Sarah established has grown to include scientists on every continent, all quietly documenting the positive changes occurring in their respective regions. From the rice terraces of Vietnam to the cornfields of Iowa, the same pattern emerges: enhanced crop resilience, improved soil health, and the gradual appearance of new species that seem perfectly adapted to help existing agriculture thrive in an uncertain climate future. The intervention was not just about preservation, but about preparing Earth's food systems for challenges that lie ahead. Bessie, the Hampshire pig whose curious digging started it all, lived to an unusually advanced age before passing peacefully. In her sleep, 3 winters after the activation, Harold buried her in the spot where she had first begun her mysterious excavation, and he marked the grave with a simple stone that bore only her name and dates. But sometimes, when the morning mist rises from the fields, Harold notices other pigs on neighboring farms displaying similar digging behaviors, as if some genetic memory of that extraordinary time continues to influence the animals whose ancestors witnessed the Great Awakening. The governments of the world continue their quiet monitoring of the situation, with classified reports circulating among intelligence agencies about the agricultural improvements occurring in rural regions globally. Official policy remains one of observation and documentation, with strict orders to maintain secrecy while studying the long-term implications of humanity's first confirmed contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The consensus among world leaders is that the intervention appears entirely benevolent, but they remain vigilant for any signs that the situation might change. Recent satellite imagery has revealed subtle patterns in global crop growth that suggest the container network's influence extends far beyond the original burial sites. The genetic enhancements appear to be spreading naturally through normal agricultural processes, carried by wind, water, and the movement of seeds and livestock. Scientists estimate that within 50 years, the beneficial modifications will have reached every agricultural region on Earth, creating a planet-wide improvement in food security that could support billions more people than current systems allow. Most profound change, however, has been in the 3 individuals who witnessed the activation firsthand. Harold, Thomas, and Sarah share a unique perspective on humanity's place in the universe, a knowledge that brings both wonder and responsibility. They understand that Earth is not isolated, but rather part of a vast community of worlds where advanced civilizations watch over younger species with patience and care. This knowledge has changed how they view every sunset, every growing season, and every interaction with the natural world around them. On quiet evenings, when the work is done and the Nebraska sky stretches endlessly overhead, Harold often stands in the spot where Bessie first began her mysterious digging. He thinks about his great-grandfather's stories of strange lights in the sky, tales that once seemed like folklore but now carry the weight of historical truth. The old man had witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. Just as Harold had been present for its completion, for generations of his family had unknowingly served as guardians of one of the most significant events in human history. The container network's activation has begun to influence more than just agriculture. Marine biologists have reported unprecedented improvements in ocean ecosystems, with coral reefs showing remarkable recovery rates and fish populations rebounding in ways that defy current environmental trends. Atmospheric scientists have detected subtle changes in air quality that suggest that genetic modifications are affecting plant life's ability to process carbon dioxide and produce oxygen more efficiently. The intervention appears to have been designed as a comprehensive planetary enhancement system. Thomas has started keeping a private journal, documenting the changes he observes in the local environment with the precision of a trained scientist. His entries reveal a world in transition, where the boundaries between natural and artificial improvement have become impossible to distinguish. New species of birds have appeared in the area, varieties that ornithologists cannot classify, but that seem perfectly adapted to the enhanced agricultural environment. Beneficial insects that were once rare have become common, creating a natural pest control system that reduces the need for chemical interventions. Sarah's research has uncovered evidence that the container network was part of a much larger galactic initiative. Radio telescope data from the past decade reveals subtle communication signals between Earth and distant star systems, transmissions that follow the same mathematical patterns found in the container symbols. The implications are staggering. Earth is not just under the protection of one advanced civilization, but is part of a cosmic community that spans multiple star systems and perhaps thousands of inhabited worlds. the ethical implications of their discovery continue to weigh heavily on all three investigators. They possess knowledge that could fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. But they also recognize the potential for social upheaval if this information were released prematurely. Religious leaders, scientists, and philosophers would all struggle to incorporate the reality of benevolent, extraterrestrial intervention into their existing worldviews. The gradual revelation of this truth, they believe, must occur naturally as the effects of the enhancement become impossible to ignore. Children born in the years following the activation display subtle differences that suggest that genetic improvements are affecting human development as well. Pediatricians in agricultural regions report enhanced immune systems, improved cognitive development, and greater resistance to environmental toxins among newborns. These changes are subtle enough to be attributed to improved nutrition and environmental conditions, but the pattern is consistent across all regions where containers were activated. Humanity itself is slowly being enhanced along with the planet's agricultural systems. The mystery of who created the container network remains unsolved, but clues continue to emerge. Archaeological surveys in regions with ancient agricultural traditions have uncovered evidence of similar interventions throughout human history. Cave paintings in France depict symbols identical to those found on the containers. And ancient Mesopotamian tablets describe agricultural techniques that mirror the enhancements now occurring globally. The intervention may have been ongoing for millennia, with each generation of containers representing an upgrade to previous enhancements. As the 10th anniversary of the discovery approaches, Harold has begun to wonder whether Bessie's digging was truly random or if she had been specifically chosen for her role in the revelation. The pig had displayed an intelligence and purpose that seemed almost human, as if she understood the significance of what lay buried beneath the Nebraska soil. Other farmers in the network regions report similar stories of livestock behavior that led to important discoveries, suggesting that animals may have been serving as unconscious agents of the enhancement project for longer than anyone realizes. The final revelation comes through Sarah's analysis of genetic samples taken from the original containers. The preserved organisms were not from some alien world but rather represented Earth's own genetic heritage, enhanced and perfected through advanced biotechnology. The extraterrestrial intelligence had studied Earth's ecosystems for centuries, identifying the genetic modifications that would allow all life forms to thrive in the face of climate change, pollution, and other environmental challenges. The intervention was not an invasion but rather a gift, the return of Earth's own potential enhanced beyond what natural evolution could achieve. Today, when Harold walks through his fields and sees the extraordinary abundance that grows from soil that once seemed ordinary, he understands that he has been witness to something miraculous. The pig that once pleaded with him to stop from digging had actually been begging him to pay attention to the greatest discovery in human history. The network of containers varied across America's heartland represented hope itself, a promise that Earth's future would be one of abundance rather than scarcity, cooperation rather than competition between species, and growth rather than decline. The story that began with a farmer's plea for his pig to stop digging had become the first chapter in humanity's conscious participation in a galactic community dedicated to nurturing life throughout the universe. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the intelligence that had orchestrated this magnificent intervention continued to watch over Earth, with the patience and care of gardeners tending to their most precious seedlings, waiting for the day when humanity would be ready to join them among the stars as full partners in the cultivation of life throughout the cosmos.